It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where the sunlight slips gently through the half-open blinds, casting warm stripes across the living room floor. The old house smelled faintly of cedar and worn leather, a scent that brought a strange mix of comfort and melancholy. He had always thought of this house as a relic, a place frozen in time, yet alive with memories he couldn't quite grasp until now. After his grandfather passed away a few weeks ago, the silence in the house seemed to echo with all the untold stories he never knew existed. He walked slowly through the hallway, running his fingers over the edges of the furniture, each scratch and dent a testament to decades of life lived. His grandfather's study was at the far end, the door slightly ajar as if inviting him in. Inside, the room smelled of old paper and ink. Shelves lined with books leaned under the weight of time, and scattered notes lay on the desk, some in neat handwriting, others hurriedly scribbled in moments of inspiration or perhaps desperation. He could almost hear the whispers of his grandfather, as if the house itself wanted him to uncover what had been left behind. On the desk, a stack of envelopes caught his attention. Each envelope was addressed in his grandfather's meticulous handwriting. The top one was heavier than the rest. As he picked it up, he felt the weight of anticipation, a strange flutter of nervous excitement. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter, the paper crackling softly. "My dearest," it began. The words were warm, familiar, yet tinged with a sadness he hadn't expected. The letter spoke of ordinary memories at first summer mornings in the garden, walks along the river, evenings by the fireplace, but as he read further, it became clear this was more than just a recounting of daily life. The letter hinted at secrets, choices made long ago, and sacrifices that had shaped not only his grandfather's life, but the lives of those around him. He paused, looking around the room as if searching for answers in the books, in the photos, in the very walls themselves. A photograph caught his eye, a black and white image of his grandfather standing beside a man he didn't recognize. They were smiling, holding fishing rods. Yet, there was something almost hidden in the background. A small, nondescript building partially obscured by trees. Something about it felt significant, though he couldn't yet explain why. He continued reading the letters, one after another, each revealing glimpses of a past that was richer, more complex, and far more heroic than he had ever imagined. His grandfather had lived through experiences that had shaped him in ways the family had never spoken about. There were mentions of travels across continents, secret acts of kindness towards strangers, and encounters with people whose lives had been forever changed by his grandfather's quiet interventions. As he explored the house, he found more than just letters. In the attic, behind a loose panel, was a small chest, dusty and locked. He tried the keyring on the desk, and one key fit perfectly. Inside, there were old journals, photographs, and documents that painted a vivid picture of a life lived with intention and courage. He discovered stories of bravery, moral dilemmas, and moments when his grandfather had faced choices that could have ended everything, but instead shaped the future of others in profound, unseen ways. Each page was a revelation. He read about the time his grandfather had helped a family escape from danger, about letters he had written to authorities to protect someone's freedom, about secret donations to causes that changed entire communities. With every story, he felt both awe and a sense of responsibility, as if a part of his grandfather's legacy was now entrusted to him. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, casting sharper light into the room. He moved from the attic to the basement, where old trunks and boxes held artifacts of life and history. There were medals, old passports, and even a faded map with markings in corners that suggested journeys he had never heard about. He felt like an archaeologist uncovering a lost civilization, each item a clue to the person he thought he knew. And yet, someone entirely new. In one corner of the basement, he found an old, battered typewriter with a single sheet of paper rolled into it. The typed message read, "To know me fully, you must follow the path I could not finish. Look beyond what is visible. Your journey begins where mine left off." He stared at the words, heart pounding. It was more than a message, it was an invitation, a challenge. He spent the next few hours going through every document, every photograph, every letter, piecing together a story that was at once ordinary and extraordinary. It was the story of a man who lived quietly, yet touched countless lives in ways that remained unseen to most. And he realized, slowly, that the responsibility now rested on him to understand, to honor, and perhaps even continue what his grandfather had begun. By evening, the house had taken on a different character. It no longer felt silent or lifeless. Instead, it felt alive with the energy of the past, pulsing with stories waiting to be told. He sat at the desk, looking over the letters, his mind racing with questions, theories, and emotions he could barely contain. Among the documents, he found a letter addressed specifically to him. "You may not understand everything now, but patience will reveal the truth. Some secrets are not meant to be shared lightly. Follow the journey, and you will find purpose beyond what you imagine." He held the letter close, feeling the weight of it against his chest, and for the first time in his life, he understood that this was more than inheritance, it was a calling. He glanced at the clock. Hours had passed unnoticed. The room was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, and shadows stretched across the floor, merging with the stripes of sunlight from the morning. The house no longer felt empty. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where time, memory, and legacy intertwined, and where the next chapter of his story was waiting to be written. With a deep breath, he rose from the chair and walked to the window. Outside, the world seemed unchanged, yet everything felt different. He understood now that life was more than the sum of its moments. It was the sum of the choices made, the secrets kept, and the courage shown when no one was watching. And he felt, in that quiet moment, a connection to his grandfather stronger than he had ever imagined, as if the man he had known all his life was still guiding him, whispering from somewhere beyond, urging him to embrace the journey that lay ahead. The night settled in quietly, blanketing the house in a soft darkness that made every creak and whisper of the old wooden floors more pronounced. He sat back at the desk, the envelope still open in front of him, but his attention had shifted to the journals he had found earlier in the attic. The leather-bound covers were cracked and worn, evidence of decades of handling. Opening the first journal, the faint scent of aged paper filled his nostrils, a mix of nostalgia and something almost sacred. The handwriting was meticulous, precise, yet infused with personality. Each entry seemed to transport him directly into his grandfather's world, a world of careful observation, moments of quiet reflection, and small, deliberate acts of kindness that had gone unnoticed by the rest of the family. As he read, he realized that his grandfather had always lived a dual life, one in the public eye, simple and ordinary, and one in secret, full of bravery, empathy, and selfless action. One particular entry caught his attention. It described a day when his grandfather had taken a long train ride to a distant town he had never mentioned before. The entry was brief, almost cryptic. Met someone today who reminded me that courage isn't loud. It's quiet, persistent, and often invisible. What we do for others in secrecy is what defines us most. He leaned back in his chair, absorbing the words, feeling a shiver run down his spine. His grandfather had always been a man of principle, but he had never imagined the depth of those principles, the courage it must have taken to act without recognition or reward. The next journal was more revealing. There were sketches, maps, and notes about people who had crossed his grandfather's path. Some were strangers who needed help, some were friends in trouble, and some were complete strangers whose lives had been altered in small but meaningful ways. He began to piece together patterns, routes his grandfather had traveled repeatedly, locations where acts of kindness had occurred, and even a few cryptic mentions of the others, a phrase he couldn't yet interpret. Hours turned into midnight. The house was completely silent, save for the occasional creak of settling timber or the distant hum of the street lights outside. He moved through the rooms, carrying the journals like precious artifacts, feeling increasingly connected to a man he had known only superficially. Each page he read revealed layers of personality, depth, and a moral compass that seemed to radiate even from beyond the grave. Then he found a photograph tucked between two pages. It showed a group of people standing in front of a small, unassuming building with a weathered sign. The writing was faded, but he could just make out community center etched into the wood. His grandfather was at the center, smiling, surrounded by people who appeared grateful, some even teary-eyed. The caption on the back simply read, "Sometimes we save each other in ways no one remembers but the universe." He traced his finger over the photo, a lump forming in his throat. This was a man who had quietly changed lives without ever seeking recognition, a concept he had always thought was the hallmark of true heroism. But seeing it visually, the weight hit differently. Compelled by curiosity, he decided to take a walk outside, journal in hand. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. Walking through the small town, he couldn't help but think about the stories he was uncovering, how a single life could ripple through countless others in ways that were nearly impossible to measure. He imagined the lives that had intersected with his grandfather's, the decisions made in silence, the risks taken without acknowledgement. It was both humbling and inspiring. Back at the house, he placed the journals on the desk and turned his attention to the envelope labeled with his name. Inside, there was a folded note written in a hand he recognized immediately. It was brief, but precise. "Tomorrow, begin where the path seems unclear. You may need to speak to people who remember more than they tell. Do not rush. Listen, observe, and learn. Trust that the pieces will form a picture when the time is right." The instruction felt almost ritualistic. He realized that his grandfather had left him more than memories. He had left him a guide, a puzzle meant to be solved through action, reflection, and patience. The gravity of it was overwhelming. It was no longer just about understanding the past. It was about stepping into a role, continuing a legacy, and perhaps even finding a purpose that had eluded him before. He spent the remainder of the night creating a rough map of the locations and names mentioned in the journals. Every street, building, and reference became a clue. The act of mapping them out provided a sense of direction, a framework for what needed to happen next. He marked locations where letters had been delivered, people had been helped, and key encounters had taken place. The map wasn't just geographic, it was emotional, a network of human connection built on trust, courage, and quiet heroism. As dawn approached, the house was bathed in a soft, golden light. He stared out the window. Journals and maps spread across the table, a mixture of anticipation and anxiety coursing through him. The realization that his grandfather's life was far more intertwined with the town, with people he had never met, and with events he had never understood, filled him with both excitement and responsibility. He knew that tomorrow would not be ordinary. It would be the first step in uncovering the full story, in meeting people who had been part of his grandfather's hidden world, and perhaps in confronting truths that would challenge everything he thought he knew. He felt a strange calm amidst the uncertainty, as if the quiet night, the journals, and the photographs had prepared him for what lay ahead. Sitting back, he closed his eyes briefly, imagining his grandfather watching, guiding, and quietly urging him forward. It was no longer just a house of memories. It was a living, breathing map of courage, kindness, and legacy. And he was ready to follow the path, uncertain of the challenges, but determined to see the journey through. The next morning arrived with a brisk chill in the air, hinting at the first whispers of autumn. He brewed a cup of coffee and carried it to the desk where the journals and map lay. Steam curled from the mug, carrying the faint aroma of roasted beans, and he took a long sip, letting the warmth settle in his chest. Today would be different. Today would be the first day of discovery beyond the walls of the house. He packed a small bag, a notebook, pens, a camera, and the worn journals that had already begun to feel like extensions of himself. His heart thumped with anticipation, mixed with a subtle fear of the unknown. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, as he stepped outside, the early morning sun casting long, golden shadows over the familiar town. He followed the first location marked on the map, a small, nondescript coffee shop that his grandfather had mentioned briefly in one of the journals. Inside, the shop smelled of freshly baked bread and ground coffee, warm and inviting. Few people were scattered among the tables, reading newspapers or typing on laptops. He approached the counter and asked the barista if she had ever known a man named his grandfather. She paused, blinking in recognition, then smiled faintly. "Oh, yes," she said. "Everyone in this town knew Mr. Harrison. Quiet man, always helping, never asking for anything in return. You must be his grandson." He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. The conversation flowed naturally as she shared memories, times when his grandfather had quietly paid for groceries for a struggling family, brought medicine to someone who couldn't afford it, or fixed a neighbor's broken fence without seeking acknowledgement. Each story layered itself into the picture he had already begun to form. A man who quietly touched lives in ways that went unnoticed by the world, but not by the people whose lives he had changed. She handed him a small envelope, saying, "He left this for you, told me you'd come eventually." His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were more letters, this time addressed to people in town he had helped, written as if he knew one day his grandson would read them. They weren't just correspondence, they were guides, reflections, and sometimes apologies for things that needed to be explained long after he was gone. He spent hours at the coffee shop, reading through the letters, absorbing the stories, and noting names and locations. Each letter hinted at another thread, another connection, another person whose life had intersected with his grandfather's in ways both small and profound. The day stretched on, the sun climbing high, then dipping toward evening. But he couldn't stop. He felt a responsibility, almost sacred, to follow each clue, to understand the full scope of what had been left behind. By late afternoon, he walked to the second location on the map, a modest house on the outskirts of town. He knocked, uncertain of the reception he would receive. A woman in her late 60s answered, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized him. "You're Mr. Harrison's grandson, aren't you?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. He nodded. She stepped aside, inviting him in. The house smelled of cinnamon and old books. Photographs lined the walls, some featuring his grandfather, others showing moments of quiet generosity. Food delivered to families, coats given to children, letters handed over discreetly. They sat together in the living room, and she began recounting stories detailed, vivid memories of his grandfather's visits during times she struggled financially, the quiet ways he supported her family without recognition. Tears filled her eyes as she described moments that had seemed small at the time, but in retrospect were life-changing. He listened, notebook in hand, writing furiously, realizing the sheer scale of the hidden impact his grandfather had made. Hours later, as he stepped back outside, the sky painted with the soft oranges and purples of dusk, he felt a profound sense of connection not just to his grandfather, but to a network of people bound together by invisible threads of kindness and courage. Each story was a reminder that heroism wasn't always grand or loud. It often existed in quiet, unnoticed actions that changed lives profoundly. He walked back toward his own home, the letters and notes safe in his bag. His mind raced with ideas and questions, with names and places to follow, with a growing understanding that his journey was only beginning. The evening air was cool now, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and the distant promise of rain. He realized that the legacy he had uncovered was not just a story to be read, it was a living, breathing testament to the power of quiet action and moral integrity. Back at the house, he spread the day's findings across the desk, connecting letters to people, people to places, and places to events. The map had become more detailed now, a complex web of stories and connections, each one a piece of a puzzle that was beginning to form a vivid, extraordinary picture. He leaned back, exhausted yet exhilarated, understanding that the task ahead would be long, demanding, and deeply rewarding. Before going to bed, he returned to the window, looking out at the darkened streets. He could almost hear the faint echo of his grandfather's voice in the wind, guiding, encouraging, reminding him that discovery was a journey of patience, reflection, and courage. The night seemed alive, a living memory of all that had come before, and he felt a deep resolve. He would see this journey through, honoring the life and legacy of the man who had shaped so many lives, without ever seeking recognition. The morning air was crisp, carrying a faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. He rose early, unable to sleep through the excitement and weight of yesterday's discoveries. The journals lay open on the desk, surrounded by letters, photographs, and the evolving map he had begun piecing together. Every name, every place, every memory felt like a breadcrumb leading him deeper into his grandfather's hidden world. Today, he decided to visit a location that had intrigued him since he first saw it. A small, weathered building at the edge of town, labeled on the back of a photograph as the community center. According to the journals, it had been a place his grandfather frequented, but the entries were cryptic, offering no explanation of what he had done there. The anticipation made his steps quicken as he walked down familiar streets that now felt strangely new, charged with the invisible energy of the past. The community center looked far smaller than he had imagined. Its wooden siding was chipped and faded, and the paint on the sign had worn thin. Yet, the moment he approached the entrance, he felt an inexplicable sense of reverence, as if stepping into a place that had witnessed countless acts of compassion and courage. Pushing the door open, he was greeted by the faint smell of polished wood and the soft murmur of conversation in the distance. Inside, he was surprised to find the center still active, a hub of community activity. Volunteers moved quietly, organizing supplies and interacting warmly with visitors. One elderly man noticed him lingering near the doorway and approached with a cautious but kind expression. "You must be Mr. Harrison's grandson," he said, eyes lighting up with recognition. "We've been expecting someone from the family. Come, let me show you around." He followed the man through the narrow hallways, past rooms filled with children's art projects, shelves of donated books, and walls adorned with photographs of smiling faces. "Your grandfather," the man began. "He was here often, though quietly. Most of what he did, no one ever knew about. He helped fund programs, provided supplies, offered advice, sometimes even protection for families who were in trouble. And he never asked for thanks, not once." As they walked, he noticed subtle signs of his grandfather's influence. A small plaque with his name, hidden beneath a shelf, a donated piano with an engraved note, a filing cabinet meticulously organized with records that spanned decades. Every detail spoke to a life dedicated to helping others, not for recognition, but for the tangible impact it had on those around him. They stopped in a modest room at the back of the building, where boxes of letters and photographs were stored. The man handed him a carefully labeled folder. "Your grandfather left this for you to find. He wanted someone who would appreciate the full picture, someone who could continue, if they chose to." He opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were letters of gratitude from people whose lives had been touched by his grandfather, photographs documenting events long forgotten, and detailed notes about ongoing programs that needed attention. Hours passed as he pored over the materials. Some letters recounted moments of profound personal transformation, stories of hope restored, and lives redirected. because of quiet acts of kindness. Photographs captured smiles frozen in time, faces that radiated gratitude and relief. It became increasingly clear that his grandfather's influence was vast, interconnected, and ongoing, a network of goodwill that had touched dozens, perhaps hundreds, of lives. By mid-afternoon, he stepped outside to clear his mind, the weight of the discoveries settling in. He realized that understanding his grandfather's life wasn't just about collecting memories. It was about interpreting them, carrying forward a legacy, and recognizing that the ordinary and the extraordinary often coexist in unseen ways. The sun slanted low in the sky, casting long shadows across the worn sidewalks, illuminating the path that had been hidden in plain sight all along. As he returned to the house later that evening, he noticed the small details he had once overlooked. The way the wind rustled through the trees, the distant hum of cars on the main road, the warm glow of lights in the windows of neighbors' homes. Each element felt imbued with meaning, as if the town itself were quietly speaking to him, offering subtle reminders of the interconnectedness of life and the invisible threads that link past, present, and future. Back at the desk, he organized the letters, photographs, and notes into categories: acts of kindness, locations visited, people helped, and ongoing programs. The map had evolved into a complex web, each thread representing a story, a life touched, a ripple of impact that continued to extend beyond his grandfather's lifetime. He realized that his journey was no longer just about discovering the past. It was about understanding it, preserving it, and perhaps shaping it further in ways that honored the integrity and courage of the man who had come before. Late into the night, he wrote in his own journal for the first time, documenting his discoveries, thoughts, and reflections. The act felt natural, as if the journals had been waiting for him to contribute his own observations, his own interpretations, and his growing understanding of responsibility. Each word he wrote was an acknowledgement that the story was no longer just about his grandfather. It was about him, the choices he would make, and the legacy he would help carry forward. The house, once quiet and still, now seemed alive with energy, memory, and potential. He closed the journal, feeling a profound sense of purpose and connection, a mix of humility and determination. He understood that the journey ahead would be long and sometimes challenging, but also deeply rewarding. And as he looked out the window at the quiet streets bathed in moonlight, he felt his grandfather's presence not as a shadow of the past, but as a guiding force, a quiet reminder that courage, kindness, and integrity were the threads that truly bind generations together. The following morning felt heavier than usual, not with dread, but with the weight of responsibility and the subtle anticipation of closure. He sat at the desk, the letters, journals, and photographs spread before him like a map of a life fully lived. For days, he had traced his grandfather's journey, uncovered hidden acts of courage, and met people whose lives had been shaped in profound ways by kindness and selflessness. Now, he understood. His grandfather had left him more than memories. He had left him a legacy, a purpose. He decided to make one final visit to a house that had remained on the edge of his map, its location mentioned only briefly in the journals, but repeatedly emphasized as significant. Walking down the familiar streets, He felt the crisp autumn air brushing against his face. Every step seemed to echo with the stories he had uncovered, each one guiding him closer to a truth he had not yet fully grasped. The house was modest, tucked behind tall trees, its porch creaking slightly as he approached. A woman opened the door, mid-50s, her face lighting up with recognition and warmth. "You're Mr. Harrison's grandson," she said softly. He nodded. "Please, come in. I've been expecting you." Inside, the house smelled of fresh bread and faint perfume, a homely comfort that contrasted sharply with the weight of the moment. She led him to a living room where photographs lined the walls. They showed his grandfather at different stages of life, quiet moments of reflection, helping strangers, guiding children, and even small acts of heroism no one had known about. Sitting across from him, she began recounting her story, how his grandfather had intervened during a difficult time in her youth, quietly offering guidance, resources, and support that had changed the trajectory of her life. As she spoke, he realized that this visit was more than a story, it was the culmination. Every letter, every photograph, every person he had met over the past days led to this moment. This final understanding of his grandfather's extraordinary life lived in quiet humility. Tears welled in his eyes as he listened, a mix of awe, gratitude, and the weight of responsibility pressing gently on his shoulders. After hours of conversation, she handed him a small box. Inside were mementos of his grandfather's personal life: a watch, letters never sent, photographs never displayed, and a final note addressed to him. The note read, "You have begun to see the world as I have always tried to live in it. Remember, courage is quiet, kindness is unnoticed, and integrity is measured not by praise, but by the lives you touch. Continue what you can, cherish the memories, and trust that even the smallest action can echo through time." He clutched the note, the words sinking deep into his heart. The room felt full, as if his grandfather's presence lingered, guiding him, reassuring him, and leaving him with the knowledge that life was a series of choices, each carrying weight beyond what we can see. Walking back home, the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, painting the sky with a sense of closure and new beginnings. He realized that the journey was not just about discovery. It was about embracing responsibility, carrying forward the values of courage, empathy, and quiet heroism. Every life his grandfather had touched was a ripple, and now he had the chance to continue those ripples in his own way. That night, he returned to the desk, arranging the letters, journals, and photographs in a way that told a story not just for himself, but for future generations. He wrote a final entry in his own journal, capturing what he had learned, the people he had met, and the profound truth that sometimes the greatest legacies are the ones lived quietly, far from recognition, yet felt deeply by all who were touched on. As he closed the journal, he sat for a long moment in silence. The house no longer felt empty. It felt alive with memory, love, and purpose. For the first time since his grandfather's passing, he felt complete, not because he had uncovered every secret, but because he understood the essence of the man who had shaped so many lives. Without ever asking for acknowledgement, he looked out the window at the quiet streets bathed in moonlight, feeling a deep, lasting connection. And in that stillness, He knew that while his grandfather's life had ended, the impact of his choices would continue to resonate through him, through the people whose lives had been changed, and through every quiet act of courage and kindness that would follow. The journey had ended, but the legacy would live on, quietly, profoundly, eternally.